Good.
That's okay, if I can't see the words, I'll just tap you gently on the shoulder.
Okay.
I can see.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're ready.
Is Andrea ready? She was
All
hiding a moment ago.
right, so, ladies and gentlemen, good evening.
Good
So
evening.
welcome. So this is the first presentation on the 2025 Lyceum program. I'm going to give you little highlights of what's coming up this year. I'm going to skip over our main presenter tonight, and Carl will introduce her, but I'm going to skip over her and go right to next month's presenter and continue on. And our next month's presenter is going to be Natalie Flambeurs, and she's going to tell us about Went and Kuhn wooden figurines. I got that pronunciation right. Now I'll have to be perfectly honest with you. I've never even heard of Went and Kuhn figurines until she presented me with the outline of the program. But it really sounds kind of quite interesting. This is a 100-year-old, more than 100 years old company in Germany, in Saxony to be exact. And they started making these wooden figurines, and which are kind of be known throughout the world among collectors, and there's a whole hobby of collectors out there just on Went and Kuhn figurines, and they're well known for their small, intricately designed and hand-painted wooden figures, so which are produced in a wide variety of versions and finishes. So she's going to tell us about that in March. Wednesday, April 9th, Carl and Susan Darlene will present a program on Alexander Graham Bell. Now, I think most all of you know that he's generally credited with being the man who invented the telephone, but he did far more than that. And I was really quite astounded when I was talking to Carl about all the other things that he actually did, including his many inventions, research on hearing and speech, optical communications, hydrofoils, and aeronautics. So I think this is going to be really fascinating, and so that's going to be on Wednesday, April 9th, and I think that'll be really quite interesting. Wednesday, May 14th, Alex Gondola will tell us about the history of Andover Newton Theological Seminary. I think this is where for 200 years, ministers in our churches in New England were trained for the ministry. Founded in 1807, significant, it's the first graduate school of any kind in America. Plus its faculty and graduates include numerous figures who were important in American history. And additionally, the Andover branch of this school was founded by Congregationalists from our tradition. So I think this will also be another really interesting another interesting presentation by Alex Gondola. He's an excellent speaker, and as you know from listening to all his sermons in church. June 11th, Wednesday, Ross Whittier will be back to give us another travelogue. This one is going to be on Ireland, the Emerald Isle. So, everybody is familiar, even if we haven't visited. So he's going to explore a bit of Ireland, and with some surprises among the familiar. We'll glimpse many famous areas along Ireland's west coast, from Dingle to Clifton, including Slayhead, and the Dingle Peninsula, the Cliffs of Moher, Burn and Connemara, and a brief stay in a castle and off to Dublin. So I think that we've seen other travelogues by Ross, so I think this will be as well received as the others. There will be no Lyceum in July and no Lyceum in August. I'm going to just stop right there in our program for the remainder of the year. I'll come back a little bit later because you'll have forgotten it anyway if I tell you tonight. So I'll tell you that a little bit later on. But right now, I'm going to give this back to Carl, and he's going to introduce our speaker for tonight.
So one of our regulars, of course, is Dave Nelson. Right? So we're looking forward to that again. So tonight, Andrea, come on over. So we have Andrea Guidoboni doing a program tonight on Shakespeare. And as you know, she has a degree in English literature, is a talented musician with a great singing voice. And she writes grants, she does Meals on Wheels, and she's going to tell us about Shakespeare and some of the plays. And as I learned by watching Chronicle or New Hampshire Chronicle last week, a lot of the quotes we give or say are based on Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And maybe you could enlighten us on that.
I sure.
So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. Where did I put my presentation? Dave, I think you may have my presentation.
You're absolutely right. I picked up yours as well as mine. Sorry about that.
Good job.
Trying to steal, huh? Nice try, Dave.
All right.
Now that you get over that panic mode.
Yeah. But actually, I should thank Dave and Pat. They brought in the bust of William Shakespeare and his collected works, in case anybody wants to skim those later. And here is a portrait of the man himself. 37 plays, over 150 sonnets, an extraordinary body of work. So extraordinary that it has kind of led people to question whether one person could actually have put all this out. And that's a question I'm not qualified to speak on. I knew enough about Shakespeare and Poe and Chaucer to teach it to 8th graders, and that's it. And I think that, honestly, that's probably about as much as any of us would want to know about any of these authors, enough to get us through 8th grade. And but I am indebted to Paula Gregory, and my own daughter also turned my attention to this book. And it's a very easy, wonderful read, but it's a very well-researched look as well at the question of whether Shakespeare did write all his plays, whether there were other people that had a part in it, including possibly some women who would have been unable to have a play performed at that time. And this is, I really recommend this, as much for the reading as she has done extensive research. There's a wonderful bibliography in the back for anybody who would want to delve into that question a little bit.
She's also a New Hampshire author.
Yes, you are quite right about that. I had forgotten that. Thank you. Yes. So yes, I taught this to 8th graders, and you know, I was standing up in front of the class, and I'm sort of talking to myself about, oh, you know, what I'm going to do. And one of my students very helpfully said, Miss Jean, don't worry about it. We already did Shakespeare. We did him in 5th grade. And I was like, oh, great. And she said, yeah, you know, double, toilet trouble. Yeah, I mean, both drains backed up. I mean, for singing, for sure. But, you know, we all burst out laughing, myself included. And it reminded me that one of the best ways to introduce Shakespeare is to make people laugh and have a little bit of fun. How do we do that? Well, you may not know this about him. He was renowned for his use of insults. Absolutely renowned. And what do 8th graders enjoy more than that? So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very brief look at the Shakespearean insult generator. Now, this goes on for pages. And the idea is you take an adjective from the first column, and a participle from the second column, and a noun from the third column, and you get to say all these things to each other for the space of like 15 minutes. So I would pass this out, everybody starts calling each other stuff. Then I would turn the floor over and say, okay, for the next 5 minutes, you get to insult me. Oh boy, even my quietest students perked right up. So I get called a lot of stuff, which is actually better than the stuff they usually try to call me. So this is how to make a very, very sick burn for somebody, a Shakespearean way. Isn't that right, Jim George? You brain sick, bat fouling eel skin? And you, Scott Whittier, you infectious, elvish-marked Carbon. I had their permission ahead of time, and so forth, yeah.
Like she thinks she needs it.
Yeah, it's better than what I usually call these two, but anyway, yeah, this is readily available on Facebook. You can take that out and really, really insult somebody in fine style. Chances are they won't even know what you're talking about. Huh? Some of them are quite obvious, others not so much. But as I said, this list is probably 3 pages long. So there's the insult piece of it. But we probably do know more Shakespeare than we actually think we do. He's credited with inventing some 1,700 words. Probably use some of these words. You were quoting Shakespeare, who knew? What I love is skim milk. He invented that. And beyond just words, you may have quoted Shakespeare phrases more than you realize. Your teenager comes home from school and immediately opens up the fridge and starts hauling out everything, the cold cuts, all the leftovers you have, and you say, take it easy there. If this keeps up, you're going to eat. You quoted Shakespeare, Bowden. Congratulations. Part 1. Yes. You're looking for a special recipe ingredient. You go to Shaw's. It's not here. You got to go to Market Basket. You go to Market Basket. It's not there. You got to go to Hannaford. Oh my goodness, you finally find it. You get home and you say, well, I found it, but that was a real wild goose chase. Congratulations, ladies and gentlemen. That's from Romeo and Juliet, our very subject here tonight. Yes. And here's the third one. You decide to leave your warm house on a very cold Wednesday evening to come down to church and listen to some woman lecture on Shakespeare, but you're not really sure if you're going to like it. You really don't get the language. And you know what? It's all Greek
to me.
Greek to me, Julius Caesar. Yes. And there are literally hundreds more like that. So you all have quoted Shakespeare a lot more than you realize. And now that we've broken the ice, and that's the taming of the shrew, let's move to Romeo and Juliet. It's the prologue to the play right here. I'm going to read it through really quickly, and then we'll do a little bit of analysis. So the next time you're on Jeopardy, you'll know what a Shakespearean prologue to Romeo and Juliet. 2 households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage, which, what their children's end not could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage. The which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. The opening lines of prologue of Romeo and Juliet. Right. What do we notice? First of all, the number of lines. I numbered them for us to save time. What do we notice about the rhyming? 2 households, both alike in dignity. In fair Verona, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean.
Rhyming.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? So if we put an A here for this rhyme, and a B here for this rhyme, then what are these? These are A and B again, correct? Okay. From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, etc., etc. What would we do here? C, yeah, C, D, C, D. I think you get the message, huh? E, F, E, F. But then what happens here? The which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. they both rhyme together, don't they? Okay. So, first of all, the sonnet form, 14 lines, 3 quatrains, a 4-line group like this that rhymes within itself, another one and another one, and then here at the end, the very 2 lines rhyme with each other, and that's called a couplet. And that ends a Shakespearean sonnet. 14 lines, this rhyme scheme. Now, iambic pentameter. Is that familiar to anybody? Iambic pentameter. Yeah. An iamb, yes, in the Wayback Machine. It's a poetic meter. Poetic meter, it's like music. It's a rhythm that's underneath the poem. It's there, but you don't read it. If I were to read this, the fearful passage of their death marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which, believe me, some of my 8th graders did when we first got started. That is there. That really steady meter is there. But then, of course, we read out over it and go for expression. But that meter is called, as you probably know, iambic pentameter. So let's see. An iamb is a foot of poetry that is a short syllable followed by a long one. Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. 5 of them together is a pentameter. So let's see. 2 households both alike in dignity. In fair Verona, where we lay our seed. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny. Again, you wouldn't say it that way, but that is the rhythm that you're hearing underneath everything, and so forth. So if you count through long, short, long, short, long, short. Am I doing this right? Yeah. Think of our stage, and you count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Iambic pentameter. The majority of his plays, well, his sonnets were certainly written in this. The plays have some passages that are like this, and there are other passages that are just blank iambs. But most of his poetry, if you scanned it out, would take this form. So, a Shakespearean sonnet, 14 lines, 3 quatrains, rhymed couplet, written in iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter is something else. It's a lot more common than you might think. It's been theorized that if we were to scan things that we say typically, we would find out that a lot of what we say is iambic, at least. Has anybody here read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier? Remember that? One of my mother's favorite. Very first line of that novel, last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. That's iambic hexameter, because there were 6, but you can hear it underneath. Oh, captain, my captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. Iambic pentameter. That's from Walt Whitman's poem about Abraham Lincoln, whose birthday it is today. Written in iambic quadrameter, but the rhythm is there still. Oh. Let's talk a little bit about this line right here. From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes. What do you notice? From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes. Alliteration, that's right, yeah, good.
Who said that?
And I didn't tell her ahead of time. Yeah. There's alliteration of the F, yes, but there's something else. From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes. Do you hear it? Another letter repeated. From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes. You hear the O repeated? Yeah. Yes, indeed, there's that. Let's look too at, we're looking for words that kind of mean the opposite of each other.
Ancient and new.
Yes. Ancient. New. You know what? There's not so much of that there. there. Well, I was looking to think about something else. Yeah, ancient and new is certainly there. This play has a lot of different themes that are the opposites. There's a lot of light and dark. Trying to think what else. Life and death is very good. That's what's in here. Life and death. That's what I'm missing. Death. Take their life. Death marked love. Yeah. Yeah. And death marked love. Where is that? Nine. Thank you. Death marked love and star-crossed lovers. The Elizabethans believed very much in astrology. They believed that your fate is written for you the minute you emerge in the stars. And so what is going to happen to these two, to some extent, was inevitable. Mm-hmm. And what is going to happen to these two? Well, two star-crossed lovers. He makes it clear at the very beginning what's going to happen here. So, that's the prologue. Anything else I want to say about that? Oh, one more thing. Two households both alike in dignity. Yeah, we're talking about the Montague household and the Capulet household. Two very wealthy, prominent families in Verona, Italy. It's important, I think, to realize that Romeo and Juliet, if their parents weren't in this terrible feud, which nobody really knows how it started, they would have been a very suitable match for each other. We're not talking about a young man or a young woman from the other side of the tracks. They would have been a very suitable match for that time, but for their parents' rage. I think it's important to keep that in mind. Okay, so how does the play open beyond the prologue? Well, it opens with some insults. The servants, the Montague and the Capulet servants meet in the street in Verona. Do you bite your thumb at me, sir? No, sir, I do not bite my thumb at you, but I do bite my thumb. In the Elizabethan era, biting the thumb was flipping the bird. So we have these two families, representatives out here, going at it in the streets of Verona, yelling at each other, insults, the works. And things start to get violent, and some of the cousins get pulled into the fray. Cousin Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, Tybalt Capulet, gets thrown into the fray. And then eventually, Lord Montague and Lord Capulet arrive, but instead of telling their respective kids to cool it, they get fighting too. That's how bad it is. So the Prince of Verona finally appears, Prince Aeschylus, and puts a stop to the brawling because he's tired of all this going on in his city. And he says, if you ever disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. In other words, if you keep this up, I will see you put to death. Now go home. That was his power at that time. Now, interestingly, Romeo did not join in any of this fighting. Now, he's at home, pining, sighing, plotting how to get the attention of a young woman named Rosaline, with whom he fancies himself deeply in love, although he's never spoken to her. He finally emerges, and after some prodding, tells his companions all about his feelings and how depressed and how anxious he is. What should I do? He says, is love a tender thing? It is too rough. And his cousin, his friend, Mercutio, says, if love be rough with you, be rough with love. Mercutio just doesn't want to hear all this carrying on. He has no idea what is bothering Romeo so much, and he says, listen, I'm going to cheer you up. The Capulets are having a huge party tonight, and the reason behind this party was to introduce their daughter, Juliet, to a young man named Paris, who was to be her suitor. Mercutio suggests to Romeo that they go to this party, they crash this party, essentially. Now, mind you, this is a party being held at the home of their enemy. They were specifically told that very morning, if you keep this up, you risk death, but they're going to go to this party anyway. What's going on here shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who was either an adolescent boy who ever dealt with one. Romeo and his crowd here are about 17 years old when this play takes place. At 17, until about age 25, actually, adolescence goes on a lot longer than we used to think. This is kind of what we're dealing with here. Ooh, not fully mature. It impacts their ability to plan for the future and consider consequences of their actions. How many times have you said to your son or your daughter or a student, what were you thinking? Well, they're thinking about as much as they can think at this stage. We forget that. Impact on behavior. They might be prone to impulsive behaviors, risk-taking. They cannot weigh consequences. Let's go to a party thrown by our mortal enemy. No problem, we crush it. Hey, you cheer up the pretty girls, it'll be great. While all this is going on, the amygdala is still maturing, processes emotion, more active in teenagers, leading to decisions based on immediate feelings rather than rational thought. Hey, who would have thought that, right? But that's what we're dealing with here, right? And added to this, for young men, there is approximately a 30-fold increase in testosterone at about this age. That's linked to mood and behavior, aggression, an increase in risk-taking, and also depression. The point I'm trying to make is that adding to this play and the tragedy, which is full of very lofty themes, life and death, light and dark, it's also very human, about characters whose action and motivations are pretty recognizable today. And this play was written, what, in the 1500s? Yeah. Adolescent girls get teen brain too, but they also get estrogen at that age, which supposedly increases serotonin, which supposedly can help to regulate moods. This may contribute to the idea that girls seem older and more mature than boys at this age, even when they may be younger than boys at this age. So, let's see if this is so or not, because we, like Romeo, are about to meet 13-year-old Juliet Capulet. Romeo sees her from a distance and instantly falls in love. He forgets all about this chick named Rosaline. Did my heart love till now forswear its sight? For I ne'er saw true beauty till this night, he says. Yeah. The actress there, by the way, is engaged to Josh Allen. That's Haley. What's her name?
Stein.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Josh Allen, the quarterback of the Buffalo Bills. There you go. So Romeo is now going to moon over, well, he doesn't know her name, much less that she's a Capulet. He's mooning over her now. But Tybalt sees Romeo there and is furious. How dare he come to this house? He wants to go up to his room and get his sword and kill him right then and there. Interestingly, Lord Capulet holds Tybalt back. He says, you know, if that's young Romeo of the Montagues, he said, I've heard, I mean, that's a lousy family, but I hear this kid is actually a pretty good kid, except for his name. Let him stay here. Prefiguring a very famous, what's in a name, oh Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Yeah, the father has already kind of prefigured that. So Romeo is allowed to stay, and he soon arranges to speak to Juliet, and the two experience a very profound attraction. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle fine is this. My lips two blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. Have not saints lips, and holy palmers too? Aye, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer. Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray. Grant thou, lest faith turn to despair. Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake. Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take. And here I always had to explain to my students, they're kissing. Saints have palms, pilgrims use them in prayer. So, it's interesting because this is an extended religious metaphor, correct? Why? A holy palmer is a person who journeyed to the Holy Land and returned the palm leaf as a token. That's part of what that is. So in this way, by framing it in this religious way, I think Shakespeare is trying to make this love seem very, very pure to people. And he might have had a very deliberate reason for that. We know from the beginning what they're actually headed toward. And everybody listening to this play, common and wealthy people alike, had to attend services at the Church of England. To not do so is punishable by a fine. So everybody but everybody there was aware of the liturgy and the teachings of the church, which includes the fact that suicide is seen as a dreadful sin. And if you were caught attempting suicide in Elizabethan England, you could be taken to court and sentenced to death. Yes. Huh? Everybody standing there would have known that. So how are you going to reconcile that with what is clearly on the way here? Well, by framing this almost as a new kind of religion, you can maybe make the point that for them to join each other in heaven is the culmination of that religion. Okay. Also, Shakespeare deliberately, I think, set this play in Italy. The Italians are different. They can do what they want. They can say what they want. They have nothing to do with the Church of England. That could be part of it, too. A very different attempt, maybe. A different take on religion. I think, though, honestly, selling this whole scene as a strictly religious sort of thing is trying to sell the Song of Solomon as a strictly religious text, if you've ever read about that. I never said this to my 8th graders, but it's foreplay, and so is this. Okay. This continues for a few lines, and then it wraps up. Thus from my lips by yours my sin is purged, then have my lips the sin that they took. So they've exchanged the sin now. Sin from my lips, oh trespass sweetly urged, give me my sin again. Kiss again. And then she says, you kiss by the book. What in the world does she mean by that? Nobody really knows, but for a 13-year-old who is presumably fairly innocent, probably hasn't had much of a boyfriend or anything like this before, you kiss by the book. It's a very kind of straightforward thing for her to say, isn't it? Kind of unexpected. However, they part, and Romeo finds out from Juliet's nurse who she really is, and to whose family she really belongs, and he is quite distraught. And when Juliet learns that the young man she just kissed and said all of this stuff to is a Montague, she is quite distressed as well. Now, a note about the nurse. This is not the Karen Swenson nurse. This nurse was literally Juliet's wet nurse. I won't go into detail, but she has been with Juliet from infancy. Juliet is now 13, so the nurse is now functioning as her nanny, so to speak. So she's the person who really knows Juliet the best. Probably better than Juliet's mother, actually, knows her own daughter. Mhm. So she's quite upset, our 13-year-old Juliet. While readying for bed, she wanders out onto her balcony, which overlooks a beautiful garden, to muse out loud about these new feelings. Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Deny thy father, and refuse thy name. Or, if thou wilt not, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. Wow. Wherefore is a very fancy word for why. People think it's a preposition, but it's not. So Romeo, Romeo, why are you Romeo? Deny your father. Say you're no longer a Montague, and refuse your name. Or if you won't do that, then I will, but if you swear to be my love, instead, then I will no longer be a Capulet. What does she see meaning by that? How is she going to change her name?
Mary.
Meanwhile, unable to leave Juliet behind, Romeo has leapt over the orchard wall into the garden. From his hiding place, he sees Juliet and he hears her speak his name. She recognizes him. I'm not going to read all of this. You can read it. What I want to look at here is the amount of words they each have, first of all. And second of all, the tone of what he's saying versus what she is saying. So he says, with love's light wings do I o'erperch these walls, for stony limits cannot hold love out. And what love can do, that dares love attempt. Therefore thy kinsmen are no stop to me. Juliet says, if they do see thee, they will murder thee. He goes on. Juliet, I would not for the world they saw thee here. He goes on. She says, by whose direction foundest thou out this place? How would you compare what she's saying with what he's about here?
She's practical.
She's very practical, pragmatic. She seems to maybe have things a little more under control than he does. Look, bud, they'll kill you if they find you here, okay? I don't want that to happen. And how did you find this place anyway? Blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on. This is an abbreviated version of this very famous balcony scene. This scene, but then she does speak at length during the balcony scene. Oh, gentle Romeo, if thou dost love, pronounce it faithfully. Or if thou thinkest I'm too quickly won, I'll frown and be perverse and say thee nay, so thou wilt woo, but else not for the world. In truth, fair Montague, I am too fond, and therefore thou mayest think my behavior light. But trust me, gentlemen, I'll prove more true than those that have more coying to be strange. I should have been more strange, I must confess, but that thou overheardst, ere I was ware, my true love passion. Therefore, pardon me, and not impute this yielding to light love, which the dark night hath so discovered. There's another line where Shakespeare refers to this as chopped logic. If you've ever tried to deal with an adolescent, why did you do that? Oh, they've got all kinds of stuff going on. Over here on the side is my sort of translation of what this actually amounts to. If you love me, say it. Or maybe I should play hard to get. But actually, I really liked you too much, and now I've shown you, and now you probably think I'm easy. Although, I mean, it's better that than to be some other girl who's play acting. But I should have played hard to get, but how could I? Because you already heard me say I love you, but you still shouldn't think I'm easy. Shocked logic. I can remember having conversations like this with my teenage girlfriend. He said this, and I said this, and he said this, and I said this. Usually on the phone. We had one phone in the house on a party line, but I had to yank the cord like this so I could go around, get into the bathroom, close the door so my mother couldn't hear me. But she heard me anyway in here, endlessly analyzing and over-analyzing what some boy had said. Andrea, get off the phone. Well, whoever he is, he's not worth this. So, but there she's doing all of this. The thing is, though, she's doing it in front of Romeo. He's still standing there, and you can just imagine him looking up at her like, oh, what? Oh, my God. But then Romeo is here, too. He has his reasons. He's here to work his lines, man. He's got some good lines, and he's going to try to work them. As my friend George used to say, he's here to seal the deal, man. He starts it again. Lady, by yonder blessed moon I vow that tips with silver all these fruit tree tops. Juliet, oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon, that monthly changes in her circled orb, lest that thy love prove likewise variable. Romeo says, well, what shall I swear by? She says, well, do not swear at all, or if thou wilt, swear by thy gracious self, which is the God of my idolatry, and I'll believe thee. Romeo, if my heart's dear love, Juliet, well, do not swear. Once again, practical, pragmatic, kind of taking lowering the temperature a little bit. But in the end, Juliet is a teenager too. And she has her own desires and impulses. And she thinks that she's in love for the very first time. So they end this scene by declaring their vows to each other and figure out that really, if we want this to happen, getting married is the only way to do it. Because even though their families are fighting, if these two are married, as you know, let no one put asunder. Right? So they make plans to have a secret wedding. They go to an adult that they both trust a lot. This is their confessor, Friar Lawrence. Romeo hurries to him to tell him all about his new love. Friar is initially confused. You mean Rosamund? He's like, oh, no, her Juliet. He's concerned at first, the friar. These violent delights have violent ends, he warns him. But he gets to thinking, well, if these two do get married, then maybe the Montagues and Capulets will knock it off. They'll settle their fight, and that will be that. So he says, this alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancor to pure love. Okay, so if I do go ahead and marry them, it's kind of nuts, they're pretty young, but this could be the result of it. So, he agrees to do this. Juliet's nurse, who is so far very privy to all of her secrets, secures a ladder, and Romeo will use that to climb into Juliet's window for their wedding night. Before that can happen, however, here we go again. They're back at it in the street. That afternoon, Romeo goes to find his friends to tell them of his marriage. Tybalt appears and wants to pick a fight. But now Romeo refuses because he's related to Tybalt now through marriage. So now they're family. And Romeo doesn't want to pick a fight. I do protest I never injured thee, but love thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love. He's going to tell Tybalt, he's going to come clean, look, I can't fight you because I'm married to your cousin now. But Tybalt doesn't know this. And when he hears Romeo say this kind of thing, he flies into a rage. This is nuts. But nobody gets madder than Mercutio, Romeo's dear friend. He says, if you cannot fight Tybalt like a man, then I will. I will take him on. And they do so. And in the middle of all of this, Tybalt stabs Mercutio, and Mercutio bleeds to death on the street. A plague on both your houses, he says at the end. Romeo, in a rage, turns around and slaughters Tybalt. Then he realizes quickly what a horrible mistake this has been. Oh, I am fortune's fool, he says. And when the prince arrives, he hears about what happened and says about Romeo, and for that offense, immediately do we exile him hence. So he is to leave the city of Verona and never return. When Romeo's mother hears the news of his banishment, she dies of grief. Back in her room at night, Juliet waits the arrival of her new husband. The nurse enters and tells her that Romeo has killed her cousin Tybalt. Distraught, Juliet finds herself married to the man who has killed her kinsman. She realizes, though, that she is already secretly married to him, and her love for him outweighs her grief over her cousin's death. So they do spend the night together. But the minute Romeo leaves the next morning, Juliet's parents, anxious to try to cheer her up over Tybalt's death, arrive in her chamber with the good news that they have set up her wedding to Paris, just as they thought to do in the very beginning of her wedding. Instead of being cheered up, however, Juliet is desperate, and she declines to take this offer. We know why, but her parents don't. And to see their 13-year-old daughter defy them like that is maddening. They're furious. And Lord Capulet says, we disown you. And he leaves the room, and Lady Capulet follows and says, you're going to marry him. You need to be at the church tomorrow morning. You're going to marry him. That's it. Off they go. Desperate, Juliet asks her nurse, what should I do? What can I do about this? The nurse says, well, look, Romeo is as good as dead, exiled. You might as well marry Paris now. I mean, there's no reason not to. Very sensible advice, in some ways, for this time. For the Elizabethan period, marriage was a contract, a business proposition. If one proposition falls through, you go to the next. You go to the next, do you not? But when the nurse says this to 13-year-old Juliet, and again, kids this age can be they either love you or hate you kind of thing. When she says this to Juliet, Juliet sees it as the most profound betrayal, and she will never speak to this woman again. Juliet hurries to the friar instead to beg for help. The friar concocts a plan and hands her a phial of sleeping potion that will cause her to fall into a death-like sleep. Romeo will be told about her plan, so he will know that she hasn't actually died, but her family won't know it. And instead of taking her to her wedding, they will take her to the Capulet family tomb, where Romeo will be waiting to meet up with her later on. So Juliet takes the potion that very night, and when her bridesmaids arrive and her mother arrives to prepare her the next morning for her wedding, she is lifeless in her bed. The nurse and the Capulets are beside themselves with grief. But, as they figured, they take her to the crypt to be entombed, they lay her out there. But Friar Lawrence's message explaining this whole crazy plot to Romeo never reaches him. He hears only that Juliet is dead. Distraught, he hurries back to Verona and from an apothecary buys a deadly poison and heads to the Capulet crypt, presumably to take it and die next to Juliet. When he reaches the tomb, he comes upon Paris, who was to have been her husband that very day, scattering flowers on Juliet's grave. They fight, and Romeo kills Paris. He enters the tomb, he sees her lifeless body, drinks the poison, and dies by her side. Friar Lawrence appears now to see what the plot, how far the plot is advanced. He arrives just in time to see Juliet wake up out of that death-like trance that she's been in. And she sees that her beloved Romeo has killed himself with poison. She throws herself on him and kisses his poisoned lips, hoping that there'll be enough left for her to die too. But that doesn't work. In the meantime, the friar hears people approaching and begs her to leave with him, but she won't. And at the end, the friar leaves without her, leaves a 13-year-old girl, distraught, lying next to the body of her dead husband, leaves her there in the crypt. Juliet sees Romeo's dagger and plunges it into her own heart. Then I'll be brief. Oh, happy dagger, this is thy sheath, there rust, and let me die. Eventually the prince and what remains of the Capulets and the Montague families arrive, seeing the full horror of their children's bodies. Lord Capulet, Lord Montague agree to end their long-standing feud and to raise gold statues of their children side by side in Verona. This play is obviously very intense at the end, and it has a lot of lofty themes, but I think the thing that always kind of struck me about it is that Lord Montague is kind of removed from his son's life. Besides, he's mourning his exile and his wife's death. He's got everything he can handle. He can't help his son at this time. Lord Capulet and Lady Capulet have disowned Juliet. Who's left? Just two desperate teenagers. Can't turn to their parents, can't tell them what's really going on and what they're really up to with this secret marriage. Their friends, their cousins, who might have talked Romeo out of this, who tried their best to stop this, are dead. The nurse has betrayed Juliet by kind of not taking her seriously enough and recognizing how strong her love was. She's dead to Juliet. And Friar Lawrence, not only did he leave Juliet at the tomb, which is hideous enough, but prior to that, think about it, she goes to him for help, and he hands a 13-year-old girl a vial of a potion so strong that it looks like you're dead. Puts it in the hands of a 13-year-old girl. To me, It's really a story about two teenagers with all their strength and their weaknesses, trying to navigate a situation that they really are not ready for at all. And the adults in their lives either cannot or will not help them. To me, that's the real tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. So it's up to the prince at the very end to give an abbreviated, a cut short sonnet. A glooming peace this morrow with it brings. The sun for sorrow will not show his head. Go hence to have more talk of these sad things. Some shall be pardoned and some punished, for never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo. Yeah.
And part of the ending is a happy birthday to Andrea. Today, right?
Yes.
Happy
birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Andrea. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, when they first said, oh, we can do it in February, great. And I looked at the day, I'm like, oh my God. But it's also Abraham Lincoln's birthday today, which is why I quoted him a little, well, the poem about him a little bit at the beginning. So if you go away with anybody's birthday in your mind, it should be his.
Andrea,
Yes.
thank you for sharing all those things about pentameters.
Yes.
Lots of numerology here.
Yes.
Your birthday adds up to 10. 37.
Oh, 37, thank you.
Yeah.
My age.
Thank
Yes.
you for sharing your insights about British culture. We have something from across the pond for you this
Oh.
evening. Just a little bit of it.
Oh.
If it will come up.
Or maybe not.
Yeah.
Ah.
When I'm 64.
That adds up to
Yes,
10
indeed.
also.
Yes, thank you. Yes, 2 37s, yeah.
I'd just like to add that I only wish that I had you for my angel.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Same birthday, not the same age as Abe.
No, I knew him, no, yeah.
Went to school together.
We did.
Does anybody have any questions on
Oh,
Andrew's
yes, any
program?
questions? Yeah, I should have pointed out, I totally forgot, I guess I was a little nervous, but, it dawned on me afterwards, this whole thing here, this too, do you notice what this is in its form? What is it? It's another sonnet.
Right.
Yes, you see, it's got the 14 lines, it has the every other line rhyming, and notice at the end,
Couple.
the two,
Yeah.
it's a couple making a couplet. That, friends, is genius. Yeah. And a little more about this book and about Shakespeare. The thing is, in Shakespeare's time, theater was very collaborative. So Romeo and Juliet was a story that was known already to people from another work that had been written earlier. It wasn't uncommon to borrow things and then to talk to a very tightly knit group of playwrights that existed at that day and possibly even put things together. And so that may too have added to the idea that somehow one person could not have totally, have himself written all of that. So anyway, done. I'm done talking.
The way you read that, it's like the beginning of rap.
Beginning of rap?
Andrea, I do have a question.
Yes.
So, I won't say I've read all of Shakespeare, but I've read quite a bit of it. And it all seems to be the same, coming from the same author. Why would people think there were multiple authors? Are there certain plays that are
Well, this one in
schematically different?
particular, no, they're not schematically different. It's not that. It's more the content of them that leads to that. And what is known about his life. So he set this play in Italy, for example. There's no record of him ever going there. Hamlet is set in Denmark, or is it?
Mhm.
I can't remember. Yeah, there's no record of him ever going there, which doesn't really mean that he couldn't see it in his mind, I guess. But that's curious. Also, in his personal life, if he wrote characters, particularly his female characters, were often quite strong and articulate for their day. Of course, Juliet, a little bit, 13-year-old. But then you have a lady, Macbeth, and Catherine, and Taming of the Shrew. And yet Shakespeare's own daughters couldn't read or write. They signed with X's. Why? Why would he care so much, ostensibly, about women's education and leave his own daughters illiterate? There are some other things too. Paula, can you remember what else is in that book about why they think there were just certain things that just didn't add up as to what he was writing? But it wasn't that the plays were written differently that cued people off. It tended to be more the content, more certain things about his own life that didn't add up to the way he was writing. Oh no, I'll think of something the minute I stop talking. Yeah. If it weren't for whoever he was, Shakespeare, the whole field of English literature probably wouldn't even exist. I mean, there's just been so much written and rewritten. Look what we got in 10 minutes out of this. I mean, it's
Only the
extraordinary.
Bible is quoted more.
What's that?
Only the Bible is quoted more.
Yeah, than Shakespeare. Yeah, quite right. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has insight into that, why they may have thought he didn't write.
He seemed to know an awful lot about royal courts,
He did.
but he wasn't a noble person.
He was not. Oh, and that reminds me. He was not a noble person, but he was invited to the Elizabethan court to perform, as were Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, other playwrights of the age. But when Shakespeare died, there's a very famous place, I think it's in Westminster Abbey, called Poets' Corner, where notable English poets are buried. Shakespeare is not there. And that was seen as kind of like, well, why not? Why wouldn't you put him there? If he really did all of
Wasn't
this.
some rumor that Sir Walter Raleigh was...
Sir Walter Raleigh, yeah, there was, I always heard Christopher Marlowe, but Christopher Marlowe died in a bar fight before some of these plays with it. Sir Walter Raleigh is credited with it. There is also, according to this book, there's a young woman credited with some of it too, but that's a more obscure theory. But here again, the notion that plays were collaborative, you could have had a lot of people. Somebody who did go to Denmark could have given him particular details and things like that. But
I mean, Othello was also in Italy as well.
yeah, and he never went. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Any more questions? Can answer? No. Okay. Everybody's hungry, and it's going to snow. So.
I think you can answer.
You go.
Oh,